And welcome back to Washington Commanders Insider. Today we're talking about the key takeaways from day one of mandatory minicamp for the Washington Commanders. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. We're talking about mandatory minicamp day one takeaways. And so the first key takeaway is that Terry McLaurin was not there. And so this is something that we knew could be a possibility, especially since reports surfaced that Terry McLaurin was frustrated with the Washington Commanders about not getting a new contract. And so he wasn't out there day one of the minicamp. Doesn't mean that the Washington Commanders can't get something done. But it looks like that this is something that could be unlikely, because one of the things that I saw was a JP Finley segment, and he was talking about the last time that Terry McLaurin was a holdout. He didn't get a deal done until July the 6th, and so it's June 11th. And so that means that we could be some time away from a new deal for Terry McLaurin if history repeats itself. But then again, we don't know what could happen, because, Adam Peters in the front office could get something done here tomorrow, and he's out there. And so hopefully he is. I think that, the sooner that Terry McLaurin gets out there, the better it is for this offense, because I think that the added pieces around him is going to help him take off again this year with Jaden Daniels in year two, because these guys were terrific as a duo. In fact, he has the franchise record in touchdowns that he broke last season. And so I could only see that happening again this upcoming season, especially with all the pieces that this team has added on offense. You have another year under Cliff Kingsbury and the things that he will be able to do with this offense. And so hopefully we can get Terry McLaurin out there, but that is the first key takeaway, is that he was not on the practice field in the first day of mandatory minicamp. And so next up, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was Dan Quinn and what he had to say to the press. And so it's always great to hear what Dan Quinn has to say. And so I think that the first key takeaway out of what he had to say, and just paraphrasing this, is he was talking about communication, and he was talking about how important that is. And he was talking about, it's one thing to go out and, have a good teaching moment, and then just really have something where you put it out there and it just seems like it's received and everything else. But it's one thing to have the level of communication with your team where they show you that they understand what you've taught. And so he talks about that being really huge for this team, and really everybody knowing where and what to do and how important that is. And so that is something that Dan Quinn is very focused on, is the communication with this team. The next thing that he talked about is Terry McLaurin and the holdout situation. And he said that, sometimes business and football run into each other. And that's exactly what we're seeing here with Terry McLaurin. It's just that's the process. And so he's not worried about that, but he's saying that, hey, hopefully the front office can take care of business, but business and football run into each other. That's what's going on here with Terry McLaurin. Next, he talks about Brandon Coleman. And so he talks about how he really attacked the offseason, talked about his footwork, and how he's really prepared over the offseason. So it sounds like that he's impressed with his versatility, and it looks like that he's impressed with the fact that Brandon Coleman is going to be able to slide inside on this offensive line. And so that's a good sign, because that's some of the things that we talked about with this team going into training camp, was just how is this offensive line now going to shape out with Laramie Tunsil out there. And so it's good to see that Brandon Coleman looks like he's off to a good start heading into year two. And so that's one of the things that Dan Quinn did talk about. And so with that being said, that leads me to the next part, and the next key takeaway out of this was what Brian Robinson Jr. had to say. And so got a chance to see about a 6-minute clip with him talking to some of the press at practice. And with him, it sounds like that he was talking about that his level of focus has to go up when they were asking him about one of the things that he's looking to do going into this. And so he talks about the level of focus. And then next, he talks about having to go out there and really prove it on the field, and talked about how that's really been the case ever since he's gotten to campus. And so ever since he's gotten to the Washington Commanders and everything else. And so that's good to hear with Brian Robinson. And you could just tell just in the way that he was speaking out there that definitely he's certainly locked in. He knows the importance of this season, with the contract situation, and then also too wanting to finish off the year a lot better than he finished last season. Because in fact, one of the things that he talks about is being healthy, right? And he says his quote, when I'm well, I'm hell. And so I love that with Brian Robinson Jr. because we knew that when he's healthy, this team is definitely pretty unstoppable, especially with what Jaden Daniels is able to do. And I've always said this, that when the Washington Commanders are able to dominate in the time of possession, they really make it tough on their opponents. And one of the ways that you can dominate a opponent and stay on the field is you have to run the football. It's also another way that you protect Jaden Daniels. And so that's why I think that Brian Robinson Jr. is going to have to really have a good season this year. I think that it's huge for him to have a good season, and hopefully he does. And so I love the fact that he's looking to stay healthy. And then lastly, he talks about the balance on offense and how it's going to be good for everyone. And that kind of goes into point number one when I was talking about Terry McLaurin, that now that Terry McLaurin has Jalen Lane, he has Deebo Samuel, he has another year with Zach Ertz, you have Luke McCaffrey hopefully stepping into things this season, you have Noah Brown coming back, like you have Brian Robinson Jr., you have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, like you have so many different pieces, Laramie Tunsil, like all these additions to the offense, I think it's going to help everybody out. And so when he talks about having a balance, I think that this just makes the Washington Commanders that much more tougher than last season because of this balance. And so I'm excited, definitely excited to hear him say that. So next, I wanted to go into the next key takeaways from mandatory minicamp, and that was that Javon Kinlaw spoke. And so Javon Kinlaw, he didn't practice out there, but I did love what Javon Kinlaw had to say. He talked about just the roster fit and just how special it is with the Washington Commanders. And so definitely talked about he's one of the guys. And look, he just talked about definitely how this winning culture is. And so sounds like he's super excited to come over, and he's super excited to help the run defense for the Washington Commanders. And so that was another good piece. So make sure you go check that out. And so lastly, the last thing that I wanted to talk about as a key takeaway was Laramie Tunsil. He was looking very good out there at minicamp, and so got a chance to see Laramie Tunsil look good along with Marshawn Lattimore. And so Marshawn Lattimore, we know last time he was out there last season, he was dealing with a hamstring, and so I got a chance to see some clips there. Looks like he's running full speed. Dan Quinn did say that he's a full participant. They could maybe decide to hold him out of one of the practices going forward in this mini camp. And so that's something that we will talk about. Laramie Tunsil, he was doing his thing out there. And one of the things too that Dan Quinn talked about going back to that and these two players is that they will have kind of like design plans for some of the players out there. So you saw, or I just talked about how Javon Kinlaw, didn't practice. Laramie Tunsil, he was doing like some individual work, and then he was kind of working with the team, and then also to some of the plans maybe that they have for Marshawn Lattimore, in the sense that maybe he sits out of practice or something like that because they have seen what they needed to see. And so these are some of the things that could be specific to certain players, because at the end of the day, it's a long season. The Washington Commanders have a lot of attention on them. And we know it's going to be a tough season for this team, and especially with all the hype and everything else. And so, you got to get to the start line healthy And so this is something that we could probably expect to see as mini camp goes along. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here what you guys are thinking about these key takeaways from mandatory minicamp day one. We'll be talking a little bit more about some more things that we're just hearing and seeing for day two of mandatory minicamp. But once again, Terry McLaurin absent. Javon Kinlaw speaking with confidence about the defense and just the fit with the team. Then Brian Robinson Jr. sounds like that he is focused and just talking about the balance that we have on offense. Dan Quinn talking about the communication and talking about the situation with Terry McLaurin. Definitely getting fired up there for what Dan Quinn had to say. And then Laramie Tunsil, Marshawn Lattimore, two guys that weren't at OTAs. They were here at the mandatory minicamp, and they've looked good so far in day one. So hopefully we can talk about some more players that are looking good and turning some heads. And so you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.